Hello, and welcome to Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Before we begin, please hit the like button if you like the video and subscribe to my channel if you want to support me. It helps more than you know. You can also join my Patreon. We are in the midst of a fundraiser for a very important cause, and I will talk about that at the end of the video. If you're here watching this, I would be pretty comfortable in guessing that you like dark stories, true crime cases, and probably horror films. Those are all things that I like. But there is one type of story, true or fiction, that I find the most disturbing, and that is any story that involves someone inside the house when the occupants don't know they're there. There is just something so upsetting about the notion of your very personal space being invaded that gets under my skin. One of my favorite episodes that I've researched and produced is the story of Daniel LaPlante, The Boy in the Wall. That's on my playlist, Dining with Death, and it's a good one if you want to watch it. I just recently watched a horror film again. I had seen it before, called The Hangman, about a man living in the attic of an unsuspecting family. These are the stories that give me the chills. But I guess there is something even worse than living in a house where someone is actively spying on you, and that would be living in a house with someone buried in the walls. This is the story of Reyna Marroquin, The Body in the Barrel. I'm your host, Stacy Lee. Let's begin. Our story begins in Jericho, New York. The Cohen family moves out of their home, and as the last of the items are placed inside the truck, Ronald Cohen realizes that there is an old barrel sitting outside on the curb, and he wonders why the sanitation department hasn't hauled it away. The movers had hauled the barrel out of the crawl space when they were clearing it all out, and they put it on the sidewalk with the rest of the garbage. So Ronald goes over to look at the barrel, and he sees that one of the garbage men has left a note on the barrel saying they didn't take it away because it was too heavy and there was a weight limit on what the city will haul away. Now, Ronald has no idea why this barrel is so heavy. He's never opened it. It's just been sitting in his crawl space for the last 9 years, the 9 years that he and his family have lived in the house. So he goes and gets a crowbar and he pries the lid off and immediately is hit with an overwhelming stench. Ronald backs away from the smell, but then he gets closer and looks inside the barrel. There he can see a human hand and a woman's shoe. Ronald runs to the house and calls the police. A swarm of cops and CSI team members converge upon the house, and they go through it with a fine-tooth comb. There is nothing suspicious but the barrel, which is confiscated and hauled off to be examined in the laboratory. There, the barrel is turned on its side and emptied. The mummified body of a woman falls out. Police and forensic team members alike are horrified. There is also this plastic green leaf off of what appears to be a fake plant, and there's a purse with its contents. So we've got a mummified body, the leaf off of a plastic plant, the purse with all of its contents. Who is this woman? Everything in the barrel has been submerged in a brownish green liquid, and there are also little plastic pellets all over everything. The mummified corpse is taken in and examined. The woman has been murdered. Her skull is crushed. She has been hit over the head with great force multiple times, and there are several areas on her skull that indicate severe bleeding before death. The woman is either white or Hispanic, and she was about average height. She had some unusual dental work that didn't look very modern, and this led investigators to believe that the dental work had been performed in an underdeveloped country. The techniques that were used on this woman's teeth were things that here in America we used like in the 1940s. The mummified body was then taken for x-ray, and that's when the story got even more shocking. The woman was carrying a 17-inch fetus, a boy, almost full term. She had been about 7 months pregnant when she was murdered. There was also some jewelry on the body. There were several rings and a pendant that said, "To Patrice from Uncle Phil." Investigators then turned their attention to the barrel itself. It had a number on it that led them to a chemical company in Linden, New Jersey. The drum was manufactured in 1965, so it was almost 35 years old at the time it was found. The police interview Ronald Cohen, and he is adamant the barrel has been in the crawl space of his home since the day he bought the house in 1990. He had never moved it. He had never tried to open it. It was there when they moved in, and it sat there until the day he had his movers pull it out to the curb. The police contact the former owner of the house, and he says the same thing. He's the one that sold the house to Ronald Cohen. He says that barrel was in the house in the 80s. When he moved in, he never moved it. He never looked inside of it. He just left it sitting in the crawl space for all of the years that he lived in the house. Investigators then turned their attention to the woman's purse. Inside the purse were some papers and an address book, but the liquid in the barrel had destroyed the writing. They could not read anything that had been written down. Even so, the CSI team decided to send the papers off to a forensic document specialist in hopes that they might be able to get any piece of information off of the papers as to who the woman in the barrel was. The forensic document team took the pages and placed them in a dryer for several days. The brownish green liquid had a jelly-like consistency. It wasn't actually wet like water. And so it took several days for this jelly to dry up. Oh, it just, whatever the substance was, you know, it's mixed with like body fat, blood, all kinds of excrement. It just is really, really quite disturbing. The analyst at the lab then used spectrograph readings to examine the papers. Unfortunately, whatever this jelly-like substance was in the barrel, it had completely removed the ink from the papers. So the scientists tried a different technique using different forms of light. And soon they were able to come up with several names in the address book along with some phone numbers. The indentations on the papers were still there from the writing, and under different kinds of light, they could actually see the indentations in the paper. The scientists gave the recovered information to the police, who immediately called the phone numbers in the book. But each time they called, the phone number had been long since disconnected and transferred to a new owner. Remember, we're talking about a 35-year gap here. How many people do you know that have had the same phone number for 35 years? Even back then, I still have both sets of grandparents' phone numbers memorized in my head, and they probably had their phone numbers for 40, maybe even 50 years, but I think those days are probably gone. The next natural step was to try and locate the people or person who owned the house in the 1960s. Police traced the deed of the house to this man, Howard Elkins, a man who was now living in Boca Raton, Florida as a retiree. The cops also started asking around the neighborhood. Some of the neighbors had been in that neighborhood for decades, and they remembered Howard Elkins. What did Howard do for work? He worked at a plastics company that used not only 50-gallon drum barrels, but also manufactured small plastic beads for shipping and for making fake plants. Beads like those found in the discolored jelly-like substance. There was also that plastic leaf found with the body. So I'm assuming they take the little tiny plastic pellets, pour them into a mold, and then use heat and pressure to press the little pellets into the shape of the leaves. I'm not a plastics manufacturer, but I've seen enough of how it works on the Discovery Channel to guess that's what the beads were for. In the 1960s, Howard Elkins was part owner of the plastics company called Melrose Plastics that was located in downtown Manhattan. Again, the company manufactured plastic trees and plants. The cops went to the manufacturer of the barrel in New Jersey, and they took a sample of the jelly found inside to that manufacturer. The barrel manufacturer in New Jersey was able to tell the police that the brownish green jelly was actually a chemical green dye used to color the base of plastic plants and trees. The manufacturer of the barrel also told police that this particular dye had not been manufactured or used since 1971. That told the police that the barrel had to have been sealed before that date. As the police continue to investigate, the CSI team is still going through the address book, and they start to get some more information. We're going to go over that in just a moment. But the story gets picked up by the national news. Newsweek runs a story on the body in the barrel, and people are talking about this very gruesome discovery. Then the police get a big break. Because the story has gone national, someone has seen the news article, and they have information about the barrel. This person makes an anonymous call to the Nassau County Police and tells them that he knows for a fact that Howard Elkins was having an affair with a Hispanic woman who worked for him at his plastics company. This anonymous caller tells the police this is actually pretty well known to everyone but Howard's wife. I think it's so shitty when everyone knows that someone's spouse is having an affair and nobody tells the other spouse. I mean, can you imagine the embarrassment at finding out that, everyone knows this about your spouse? Police officers in Nassau County flew to Boca Raton to interview Howard Elkins. When they got there, they found an elderly man living a very nice life as a retiree who did not want to talk to the police. At first, Howard wouldn't even sit down with the cops, but they persisted. They finally got him talking and they asked him about the barrel inside his house. Howard firmly denied that he ever used barrels like the one found at his former house. He said he owned a plastics manufacturer and they had no use for that type of barrel. Then Howard denied that his company ever used the green dye, which was known as halogen green, and the cops knew that was a lie. Howard went so far as to deny using the plastic pellets to make leaves for the trees at his company. One of the cops later said he was surprised that Howard was going to such an extent to lie about every little detail because it's easy to find out that these little plastic pellets are used to make plastic parts. The guy owns a plastics company. This body is found covered in little plastic pellets. Then the police asked Howard if he had ever had an affair with one of his employees. Surprisingly, he said yes, he had. The police questioned him further. Howard said he didn't even remember the woman's name. It didn't mean anything to him. One of the cops said he pushed Howard and pushed him, saying, "You're telling me you do not remember the name of a woman that you had an affair with?" Howard said no. One of the New York officers then pulls a DNA testing kit out of his pocket and he puts it on the table. And he asked Howard if he would submit to a swab of his mouth to prove that he was not the father of the baby they found inside the woman in the barrel. Howard said no, he would not do that. He was not going to give them his DNA. Just then, in the interview, the phone rang at Howard's house, and it was Howard's wife. Howard turned to the police and said, "This is my wife. I have to have a private conversation with her," and he asked them to leave. So the two cops stood up to go, but one of them turned to Howard and said, "We're going, but we're coming back with a court order to get your DNA. We know you are the father of that baby." The police knew that Howard was lying to them, but they didn't know what he was going to do next. Howard Elkins drove to Walmart in Boca Raton, Florida. He went inside and purchased this 12-gauge Mossberg pump-action shotgun and a box of ammunition. The next day, Howard's wife couldn't find him. She and the couple's son began looking for Howard. They knocked on doors and they asked around the neighborhood. And then they came to a neighbor's house with an open garage and they saw something. There, inside the neighbor's car, was Howard Elkins. He had taken the shotgun he purchased, placed it between his legs, and ended his own life. He was 70 years old at the time. The police collected a sample of Howard's blood and sent it in to one of the very first DNA testing companies in existence, LabCorp. I find that kind of funny because that's where I get my blood work done every 3 months. I didn't realize LabCorp was one of the first DNA testing facilities ever. The blood they take from Howard is tested for paternity against the fetus that the woman was carrying, and it is confirmed Howard Elkins was the father of the fetus found in the pregnant woman. Even though the tissue samples were degraded, and this was 1999, the lab was able to match the DNA banding pattern. There were enough bands that matched up in the fetus's DNA and in Howard's DNA. They could tell he was the father. The police now felt that they had solved the crime. Howard Elkins had been having an affair with the woman in the barrel. She got pregnant. He didn't want his wife to find out what he had been doing, and he didn't want to take care of the woman or their baby, so he murdered her and stuffed her in a barrel and put it in the crawl space of his house in the late 1960s. My question is, why on earth didn't he take the barrel with him when he moved out? How do you just go about your life knowing that you have murdered someone and stuffed them into a 55-gallon drum, hidden it in your crawl space? How do you go about your daily life with that at your house? Do you want ghosts? Because this is how you get ghosts. I can't wrap my mind around what he did. I guess some killers figure that the body is better off where they can keep an eye on it, but then to leave it there and move out of the house is just, Like, everyone knows exactly who owned the house. It's not like the ownership of the house cannot be traced, you know? So this is something I just cannot wrap my head around. You just move out and leave this horrible, dark secret sitting there for anyone to find. With Howard dead, the only tie they had to the victim's identity was the address book. That was now their only hope. I think it's laughable that Howard tried to say he couldn't remember the woman's name. You don't forget the name of someone that you get pregnant and then murder. Give me a break. So the CSI team continues to examine this little address book, giving it chance after chance to give up its secrets. On one page, I find this extraordinary, they use several techniques. And look, just here, you are able to clearly see the name Howard Elkins, along with his former phone number and his former address. The address where the body would be found. Then on another page, they find the name Kathy Andrade. Cops know it is a long shot, to say the least, but they call the phone number and they cannot believe it. Kathy Andrade picks up the phone. 35 years later, she is still in the same apartment and she still has the same phone number from the late 1960s. They have just hit the jackpot. I'm back. I look a little different because it's a different day. Technical difficulties. I guess my SIM card went kaput in the middle of filming this episode, so I had to come back and refilm the second half. I'm real professional here. I'm running a real professional operation. The police explained to Kathy that they have found the body of a young woman in a barrel at Howard Elkins' house, and Kathy actually stops them in mid-sentence and says, "I know exactly who that young woman is." Kathy tells the police that she has spent the last 35 years wondering what happened to that woman, and she has no doubt that she knows the identity. Kathy starts to cry and tells the police that the woman is Reyna Marroquin, and that she was in an English class with Kathy like 35 years ago. The two women became friends at this English class while they were trying to learn their new language after emigrating to America. Reyna came to America on her own in hopes of a better life. She was born in El Salvador and had dreams of moving to the United States and learning English. Reyna lived here in this very room inside a Catholic boarding house for single women. Her goal was to find a job, to pay her bills and save money while she was learning English, and then hopefully she was going to get an education at the Fashion Institute. She was interested in becoming a designer. Reyna wanted nothing more than to become an American citizen. Kathy said Reyna talked nonstop about her family, about how much she loved them and missed them, and that she was going to make it big in America so she could bring them all here and make a better life for them. At class one night, Reyna told her friend Kathy that she was pregnant. Kathy didn't ask who the father was, but she did ask, "Is the father going to marry you?" And Reyna answered, "Yes, he will eventually marry me." A couple of weeks went by, and Reyna confided in Kathy that the father of her unborn child was a married man with 3 children, and she said she was starting to worry that he was never going to leave them and marry her. It's always sad for me when women fall for that, you know? I feel sorry for Reyna. She's all alone in a new country. She barely speaks the language. She is very vulnerable. And then this older man who owns the company that she works for shows an interest in her, starts having sex with her. She's probably hoping he'll take care of her, or maybe she even gets pregnant on purpose. Who knows? Thinking that this will ensure a better life for her and her child. Reyna comes to class one night and she is upset. She tells Kathy that she has really done it. She got very angry the night before and she made the decision that would essentially end her life. Reyna called Howard's wife at their home and she told Mrs. Elkins that she was Howard's lover and that she was pregnant with his child. Reyna tells Kathy that after she did that, Howard called her back and told her very plainly, "I am going to kill you. I will never forgive you and you are dead." The next week, Reyna did not attend class. Kathy went to Reyna's humble little room inside the Catholic boarding house and found the door unlocked. Kathy sat down on the bed and waited for 3 hours. The phone never rang. No one ever came to the room, and so Kathy finally got up and walked to the police station. She said she needed to speak with an officer, but the officer wouldn't take a report because Kathy was not a relative of Reyna's, simply a friend. That's very frustrating. You know, a lot of people don't have blood relatives in their life. They only have their chosen family, their friends. And I'm really hoping we are doing better with allowing friends to report people they love missing. I know there are some states that have changed those laws, but I don't think all. Acquaintances and friends, bosses, military leaders, church leaders, those people should all be able to report someone missing. Kathy Kathy didn't know the name of Reyna's baby daddy, so it was pretty much a dead end. Even if the cops had agreed to look for Reyna, which they didn't, they wouldn't have a clue as to where to look because Kathy didn't know the man's name. Reyna had no family that would know this guy's name, let alone where he lived or how to get in touch with him. The police then pieced together the last night of Reyna's life. They believe that Howard Elkins lured Reyna to the factory where she worked sometime after she called his wife and told her that, she was pregnant. Perhaps Howard said he wanted to try to work something out with her, make some sort of an arrangement with her. I really wish she wouldn't have gone to meet him, but, she was in a very desperate situation. Police believe that as Reyna walked into the office, Howard hit her over the head with a heavy object, and then he beat her to death. He then loaded Reyna's body into his car and drove it to his house. Neighbors told the police that Howard spent a lot of time on his boat. And so the police surmised that he was planning on taking Reyna's body out on the water and dumping it in the ocean. At his house, Howard put Reyna's body into the steel drum and then covered the body with those little plastic pellets that he believed would add enough weight to make the barrel sink. Now, seems like a little bit of an odd choice to me. I didn't think those pellets would weigh that much, but apparently they do. Howard takes Reyna's purse and throws it inside the drum and seals it up. What he didn't realize is that the drum now weighed 350 pounds, and there was no way he could move it at all, let alone, get it onto his boat by himself. So Howard Elkins made the decision to push the barrel far back into the crawl space of his house, and there it sat with Reyna and her baby inside for the next 35 years. It is a gruesome, horrific, and malicious act. Can you imagine the black heart and total lack of conscience that it takes to live your life in a house just feet above the pregnant woman you murdered, pregnant with your own child, stuffed into a barrel under the family's feet? Your children are having birthday parties and summer vacations and going to school and having their photos taken in this house, and your murder victim is stuffed into a barrel underneath it. That is some real serious psychosis. They say that men are better at compartmentalizing things in their minds than women are, and I completely believe that. But that isn't just compartmentalization, that is psychotic. Then take into account the fact that 2 other families lived in that house, raised their kids in that house, had their birthdays and celebrations all over the top of this murdered woman and her baby. That must be horrible for them to think back on. And what would have happened had the garbage collectors not refused to take the barrel and picked it up, threw it on the truck? What would have happened had Ronald Cohen did what the last 2 house owners did and just left the barrel in the crawl space? This poor woman may never have been found. Think about her family back in El Salvador and what they've been through. Their loved one literally vanished in a foreign country, and they've all been left for decades to wonder what happened to her. It's horrible. This is a sad, sad story about a young woman, they think she was about 27 at the time, who had her whole life in front of her, and she was murdered because she got mixed up with the wrong guy. That's sad enough, but to know that no one went looking for her, that she had no family in this country, that she had no one to turn to, makes me even more sad. After Reyna's body was found, a reporter for Newsday flew to El Salvador in search of Reyna's family, and he found them. These photos were taken back in the early 2000s of Reyna's 95-year-old mother. When the reporter told this mother that Reyna had been found, her mother almost collapsed. She had to be held up by people in the home. Reyna's mother said she had been dreaming about her daughter for 35 years, always wondering what had happened to her. Reyna's mother actually told the reporter that she had a dream that her daughter was in a barrel. She said the dream had haunted her for years. In a great twist of irony, Reyna's mother then tells the reporter that the reason Reyna left El Salvador is because she found out that her husband had a lover and his lover was pregnant with his child. There are so many stories like this and so many Reynas out there. As unlucky as she was, Reyna is one of the lucky ones in the way that she was found. How many other women are out there buried at the bottom of the ocean or waiting in a basement crawl space for someone to find them and hear their story? Thank you for joining me today on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more from me. You can also join my Patreon. For a few dollars a month, you help keep the videos coming, and we're also doing a fundraiser there. This is the thumbnail for the video on my channel that explains the fundraiser in detail. We are raising money for a very important cause. I sure hope you're doing well, and I want you to know, as always, how much I appreciate your support. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other, and I will see you next time on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee.